Have scientists found evidence of the existence of the soul? Scientists have captured a very strange thing coming out of the body, something that looks like an aura, using their instruments. You might have seen this on the internet as well. Many reports are making such claims. Well, you won't believe it. What did the scientists see? Take a close look at this image. These are pictures of a man taken at different times. The blue part here is normal. But the green, yellow and red areas are parts of the body that are releasing a special kind of light. And no, these are absolutely not infrared camera images which capture body heat. Let me show you an infrared image as well. It looks something like this. Body heat is highest in the midsection, which is why these areas are lighting up here. But in the photos taken during the experiment, the midsection isn't lighting up at all. Notice how the light particles are most visible in the center of the face. But in contrast, the image of a dead person looks like this, completely blue and lifeless. Here's another example. This is a living mouse, and this is a dead mouse. So what exactly is this glowing thing that appears in a living being, but suddenly disappears after death? And which isn't just body heat? Well, this exact question also occurred to the brilliant Japanese scientist Masaki Kobayashi from Tohoku University in 2009, and it was to find the answer to this that he performed the human light experiment. And Masaki had no idea that the discovery he was about to make would spark a revolution that would forever change the way we see the world. Well, at the same time, many believed, including many scientists, that this could never provide clear evidence for the existence of the soul or consciousness. And they even demonstrated this through proper experiments. But even then, Masaki was not completely convinced. So what exactly did Masaki know about this unknown light source? In the year 1923, in the Soviet Union, a Russian biologist named Alexander Gurevich was obsessed with one question. How does a single cell divide and become two? To find out, he was closely observing the roots of some onions under a microscope. And that's when he noticed that the cells at the tip of the root were somehow communicating with each other. They were sending signals to each other to multiply. But not through slow chemical signaling instead, it was through instant and invisible signaling. He hypothesized that the cells were emitting some kind of invisible radiation which sent signals to the other cells to multiply. And that's how the cells went from 1 to 2. He called this phenomenon mitogenetic radiation. But are they able to actually prove their claim? Well, they designed a very smart experiment to test this. They took two onions with roots, where one onion's root was in the growing stage. This was called the sender onion, which would send the signal, and the other onion was called the receiver, which would receive the signal. They then precisely pointed the tip of the sender onion's root at the root of the other onion and placed a thin quartz glass in between so that there would be no direct contact or chemical signaling. Now they left the setup as it was for a few days, and when they returned and looked at the results under the microscope, their heartbeat quickened. Because in the exact area of the receiver root where the sender root's tip was pointing, the cells had multiplied in large numbers, significantly more than in the other unexposed areas. And just a few years before that, in 1905, as you might remember, Einstein's special theory of relativity was also published, which considered light as a fundamental concept. And that's why Gurevich was now absolutely convinced that invisible light, or what you might call aura, mitogenetic radiation, really does exist, which sends signals to cells to grow. And he formally published this very discovery in a research paper in 1923. And as soon as it came out, it created a huge stir among scientists from Moscow to Berlin. Gurevich became a rock star overnight, and scientists and laboratories everywhere started trying to replicate this experiment themselves. Now comes the twist in the story. Within just a few years, when around 500 scientists independently tested this claim, they all started getting mixed results. Some observed growth, while many others saw no difference at all. And no one found any proof of that mysterious light either. Now, because of this, critics who had been silent for years also got a chance to speak up. Many scientists started calling Gurevich's research an optical illusion. A physicist named Irving Langmuir even directly called it pathological science, which basically means sick science. But Gurevich was 100% convinced about his discovery. He even published two books, The Theory of the Biological Field in 1944 and Mitogenetic Radiation in 1945. And until his final moments, he kept promoting his idea, before finally passing away in 1954. he entrusted his daughter Anna Gurvich with the responsibility to prove his theory true. The year is 1962 and technology has advanced a little. While experimenting with a special kind of device, Anna stumbles upon something that could restore her father's lost honor. This device was the photon counter multiplier. As the name suggests, it's basically a counter of photons, that is, particles of light, and a multiplier, meaning an amplifier. Just like an audio amplifier, it amplifies the low audio input captured by a microphone. Similarly, this device amplifies the input of low light particles so that we can easily measure them. They placed this device in front of plant cells inside a dark box for some time. And even in complete pitch darkness, the detector started detecting particles of light within a short period. And just as Alexander Gurvich had said, these cells really do produce light, which we simply can't see with our eyes because it exists in the ultraviolet spectrum of about 200 to 300 nanometers. Let me explain. Look at this. These are the particles of light, photons. Now in physics, these photons travel like a wave, and that's why we also call light an electromagnetic wave. These light particles travel in waveform at different frequencies, but we can only see those frequencies of light that travel in the range of 380 to 780 nanometers, which we call the visible light spectrum. But because these cells were releasing light in the range of 200 to 300 nanometers, that's why we couldn't see this UV spectrum light with our eyes. Plus, the detector also indicated that the number of light particles being released here was extremely low, only 1 to 1000 photons per square centimeter per second. Whereas a typical 60-watt bulb emits about 1 quintillion photons per square centimeter per second. And that's why, until now, no one had been able to prove the existence of this light emitted by living cells. Now let's see how this new discovery could open up an entirely unknown dimension in the future. Naturally, after such a major discovery, many scientists once again started taking an interest in Gurvich's work. A lot of big questions began to arise, because this meant that our bodies must also emit light. So, does this light play any role in keeping us alive? What if our body's main functions actually depend on this very light? If so, could we measure these light particles emitted from someone's body to determine their health status? To find out if they have any hidden serious illness that's silently killing them before their time? Like a hidden killer such as cancer. Fritz Albert Popp was one of those scientists who, in the 1970s, was deeply obsessed with cancer research. During this time, at the University of Marburg, he came across Gurvich's research papers and became absolutely fascinated by the concept that living cells emit light particles. He was the first in history to name them biophotons, and he called this process ultra-weak photon emission. And they start researching this even more deeply. They are the first to experimentally test the existence of these particles themselves, but along with this, they also make another major revelation, that photons are not just random leaks of light, but rather, they are a sophisticated communication system of cell 7 of our entire body, which regulates every function, from DNA repair to growth and maintenance. They claim that these biophotons form coherent patterns, and it is through these patterns that important biological information is effectively communicated. Now, coherent patterns is basically a term from quantum mechanics. To explain it very briefly, look. When many waves are aligned or focused in the same pattern or order, that's called a coherent pattern. For example, a laser light which travels in a highly focused unidirectional way. And that's why optical fibers that deliver the internet also use laser light to transmit data packets. Because there's no interference, communication happens super effectively. But if the order of those waves is not the same, then they're called an incoherent pattern. For example, a bulb, which when turned on, emits light randomly in all directions. Because of this, a lot of information gets wasted, communication becomes weak, and a lot of extra noise is also created. But how did Fritz Albert Popp claim that the light emitted from cells forms a coherent pattern? Well, he collected statistical data on all the photons being released, which revealed that these photons were being emitted in a fixed harmonious pattern like synchronized music. Based on this, he proposed the grand theory that these biophotons act like a cellular radio, which is emitted by the cell's DNA and spreads signals for growth, repair, and immune responses throughout the body. It is only through the proper communication of these signals that the body is able to function correctly. If there is even a slight glitch in these signals, the body becomes ill. For example, he claimed that in cancer cells, the coherent pattern of these light particles gets disturbed. This means that, according to this theory, whether someone has hidden cancer in their body can be detected by studying the light emitted from their cells. Quite a big revelation, right? He also published all of this in his 1989 book, Biophotonics. But how true was all of this? Because until now, we didn't have any evidence for it. But Fritz Albert Popp was a very charismatic and inspirational scientist who left no stone unturned in spreading his big idea. He gave speeches at conferences, wrote books, and even linked biophotons with quantum mechanics, which led to his idea gaining worldwide attention. And after establishing the International Institute of Biophysics in Germany, Fritz Albert Popp had truly become the father of biophotonics. But as soon as Popper's ideas became famous, it was as if the entire scientific community split into two groups. The first group was the believers who, inspired by Popper's ideas, began to research further on them, and the second group became the disbelievers who did not agree with these ideas at all. They believed that there must be some other explanation for these weak biophotons. Now let me ask you friends, if you were there, which group would you have chosen? And who was actually right? Well, as you will see ahead, how Popp's discoveries blurred the line between science and spirituality for decades. Even scientists themselves couldn't understand what was science and what was spirituality or metaphysics. Its impact was such that even today, many ordinary people can't understand the difference between science and spirituality. They can't distinguish between scientific proofs and spiritual claims or speculations, and they fail to recognize the difference between belief and superstition.
Some people's auras are weaker than others, and some people's auras attract you more. And that's what makes the difference between a star and a non-star. To be frank, it's an energy, and that particularly grabs people's attention. And not everyone's gaze or eyes are good.
But this video will also make that abundantly clear today, providing the full historical and scientific context and background. So back to 1990, one of the many scientists inspired by Fritz Albert Popp was the Russian scientist Konstantin Korotkov, who in 1990 claimed to have made some absolutely mind-blowing discoveries. One of these discoveries was that after a person's death, their body gradually releases consciousness in the form of an aura over a period of 24 to 48 hours. Well, in 1990, Konstantin created a device that could measure a person's aura that he called the biofield and determine the patient's energy state just by doing so. It could reveal whether the person was experiencing any physical or mental pain or illness. This device was called gas discharge visualization, or GDV. And Konstantin believed that this aura is actually evidence of consciousness, which depends not only on a person's physical and mental health, but also on their spiritual health. In 1998, he also wrote a book called Light After Life. In it, he made several controversial claims. For example, he wrote that after a person dies, their body gradually releases its aura, that is, consciousness, into the surrounding areas and objects. As if the soul is leaving the body. According to him, this can even be measured with a GDB device, because the energy levels of the surrounding objects will start to change. And the way a person dies also determines what kind of aura they leave behind. If someone dies in an unnatural or violent manner, the aura that leaves their body will be extremely intense, irregular, and prolonged, reflecting unresolved emotions. And if the death was peaceful and natural, the aura will be released in a steady and smooth manner. Basically, Konstantin tried to connect science and spirituality through his work, which was a commendable effort. But unfortunately, while his book gained a lot of popularity, his work did not achieve the same level of credibility within the scientific community. This was because Konstantin's experiments were conducted with a very small sample size, and none of the experiments were peer-reviewed. That is, they were not tested and verified by multiple other scientists. This means there was a good chance that Konstantin might have been misinterpreting the results or seeing them in a different way. I'll explain exactly what happened to him later. But in the 1990s, there was another scientist from Japan, Masaru Emoto, who is still extremely popular today, and who took things a step further by declaring this idea of light having a consciousness or energy field to be universal. That is, consciousness is not just present in humans, but exists as a field throughout the entire universe, including in water as well. Yes, consciousness in water. Many people won't be able to swallow this idea even after drinking water. But Emoto performed some mind-blowing experiments by communicating with water to prove this, which became world famous. He took distilled, that is, pure water, in two containers. He exposed one container to positive messages and the other to negative messages. such as by sticking some positive words on the outside of one container. Words like love, gratitude, peace, and harmony were placed facing inward. Meanwhile, on the other container, he stuck negative words like hate, evil, stupid, and disgust. Now, in front of the positive container, his staff kept verbally repeating the positive words over and over. Similarly, in front of the negative containers, they kept repeating the negative words. And then finally, they took small 0.5 milliliter samples from both containers, placed them on a plate, and set them to freeze at minus 20 degrees Celsius. They found that the ice structures or snowflakes from the positive container samples were healthier, more structured, and symmetrical. But on the other hand, the ice structure of the water exposed to negative messages was very asymmetric, unhealthy, and irregular. He tested this multiple times with different messages. He also found a difference between city tap water and natural mountain water, stating that city tap water contains a lot of negative energy, while natural water has positive energy. The voice of Masaru Emoto. In 2003, Emoto also published his influential and widely recognized book, The Hidden Messages in Water, which quickly became a prominent New York Times bestseller even today. This book has a 4.7-star rating on Amazon. So was this really true? Was science in some way appearing to connect with spirituality through its discoveries? For example, Emoto also claimed that water connects our 4 dimensions to the soul's 5th dimension. Did Emoto miss something? Well, I'll give you the answer to that very soon. But for now, let's focus on the second group of scientists, the disbelievers. These are the scientists from the second school of thought who did not agree at all with Fritz Albert Popp's interpretation. They felt that Popp was misinterpreting the results obtained in the experiment and had gone astray. This group mainly consisted of 3 scientists, Fritz Scheffer, Terence Quickenden, and from Japan, Masaki Kobayashi. Look, by that time, it had been established beyond a doubt, with proper experimental proofs, that our body sand, even plant and animal cells emit light of very weak intensity. Ultra-weak photon emissions, or biophotons, as we saw earlier, are in the range of about 1 to 1000 photons per square centimeter per second. However, according to these scientists, Popp's grand theory of linking this to consciousness was highly speculative and not at all based on evidence. But these scientists had an alternative explanation. An idea that had already started developing in parallel as early as the 1930s, that is, 50 years earlier. The story begins in the 1930s itself, when scientist Alexander Gurevich first tested Gurevich's idea and suggested that weak light could actually be produced as a byproduct of chemical reactions happening inside cells, just like we've seen bioluminescence in sea creatures and some flies, like fireflies. There must be some kind of similar light. But this was just a basic idea of his, without any evidence. Then, after the invention of the photomultiplier in the 1950s, 2 American scientists, Bernard Strahler and William Arnold, worked on this idea and rigorously tested it on plant and algae cells. After conducting several experiments and tests, they formally published their findings in a research paper. This research paper, Light Production by Green Plants, was published in a proper peer-reviewed science journal, the Journal of General Physiology. This means that their research was approved by other scientists. In this paper, as you can see, they revealed that the light emitted by the plant is exactly proportional to the metabolic activities happening in the plants, that is, photosynthesis. So now it was clear that this light has some connection with metabolism, which is also called chemiluminescence. But how exactly are these weak photons being created? What is the exact mechanism behind them? Is it the laws of physics and chemistry or spiritual laws? To truly understand this at the root level, we needed advanced technology in optics and photography. And in the 1980s, there was only one country that was leading in this field. Can you guess which country? The country where even today almost all the top camera manufacturing companies are based, Japan. Masaki Kobayashi is a biophysics and electronics researcher at Tohoku University in Japan. Since the 1980s, he has been one of the biggest skeptics of Fritz Albert Popp, and from a very young age, he started conducting research on plant cells. He knew that if we wanted to get to the root cause of the light emitted from cells, we would need very advanced imaging technology. And that's why, since the late 80s, he started collaborating on research with Japanese industries, And finally, in 1999, he achieved a major breakthrough. Kobayashi, working with companies like Hamamatsu Photonics, had a super advanced camera built to capture extremely sensitive images. A cooled charge-coupled device camera or CCD camera. This camera was like shifting directly from a black and white television to a color television. Because, number one, this camera was cooled down to minus 120 degrees Celsius, which meant that almost no thermal noise was captured during image capturing. Number two, it could literally detect even single photons along with their exact location in space and time. Earlier photomultiplier tube devices could only detect photons from a single point source. That is, they could only confirm that yes, photons are being released, but they couldn't do real-time imaging at multiple locations. Number three, these new CCD cameras could create a complete 2D real-time map, which evolves in real time based on the flow of photons. This means that now we could know exactly where, how, when, and how many photons were released in a system. With this, you could literally study these ultra-weak photon emissions with great accuracy. And number four, with high-throughput lenses, it had now become easy to process large amounts of information simultaneously. With this generational leap in technology, Kobayashi was now ready to conduct a historic experiment. To study the light emitted from a rat's brain to pinpoint its exact source. The experiment was quite simple. They took some rats whose brains were exposed. These were placed in a dark room in front of CCD cameras for about 20 minutes. At the same time, an EEG machine was connected to their heads to measure the brain's electrical activities, and a CBF device, that is a cerebral blood flow device, was also used to monitor their blood flow and, consequently, their oxygen levels. So basically, they were going to receive three types of data from the brain. Number one, the brain's electrical activity. Number two, data on blood flow and oxygen levels. And number three, a 2D graphical dataset of the exact locations and time periods of photon emissions. When they ran the experiment, they noticed some interesting patterns. Whenever there was a spike in electrical activity or oxygen levels in the brain would release more photons. And this pattern was completely consistent. Now, an increase in electrical activity and oxygen consumption clearly meant that there was neuronal activity happening in the cells, which was being supported by metabolism, that is, energy production. And whenever metabolism occurs, what gets produced more as a byproduct? Well, on one hand, there's normal plain water, and on the other, there's ROS, that is reactive oxygen species. Now, water clearly isn't emitting photons. So these RO's reactive oxygen species, could it be that they're secretly emitting light? Well, from the data of this experiment, with proofs and evidence, Kobayashi made some important discoveries. Like number one, that a mouse's brain literally glows due to stress. Yes, these light particles, photons, are being created inside an animal cell due to cell metabolism. Number two, this metabolic stress also increases the levels of ROS, which is itself a byproduct of metabolism. And number three, most importantly, as ROS increases, photons also increase. So could it be that ROS is actually responsible for these photons? Is ROS the hidden culprit that we were mistaking as evidence of the soul or consciousness? Well, Kobayashi wasn't going to stop after coming this far. There was still a major discovery and a huge revolution yet to come. Because if this finding was correct, it could literally help prevent deadly diseases like cancer before they even start. In 2007, Kobayashi conducted another smart experiment to confirm the causal link between ROS and this ultra-weak photon emission. Just look at the brilliance of this scientist, one after another. He took two cowpea plants and they deliberately sprayed a special kind of virus on them, the cucumber mosaic virus. This was done because they needed to trigger an allergic response in that plant. Now, what actually happens in an allergy? Simply put, basically more stress is created. So more stress equals more ROS. And technically speaking, it starts killing the body's cells so that the virus doesn't spread, which in turn increases the cell's turnover rate, that is, metabolic stress increases, and as a result, so does ROS. So in short, if an allergy is triggered, ROS will increase. Now, if ROS is the real hidden culprit, then as it increases, the release of photons will also increase. Now here comes another smart move. They had already injected a powerful antioxidant, Tyron, into one of the plants, which binds with a common ROS, superoxide, i.e. O2, and destroys it. And then, when they measured the amount of photons in both plants, they observed this. Number one, exactly in the areas where the allergy was triggered, the number of photons spiked in those very spots. That means the plants were literally growing extra while fighting the virus. In fact, a gradient was created, meaning the closer to the allergy area, the more photons there were. Number two, the antioxidant tyrant reduced the intensity of these photons by 50 to 80%, which clearly meant that ROS was the main cause of these photons because antioxidants specifically reduce ROS. They finally proved that ROS is the actual reason why we glow. We had come so far in the research of these biophotons. From the world of spirituality and speculation, we had returned to the domain of practical, logical, and hardcore evidence-based science. Now, yes, this meant that we couldn't detect the soul or consciousness with them, but we could 100% detect life-threatening diseases like cancer. In 1995, Kobayashi proved through experiments on mice that cancer cells glow 1.51 to 4.7, 3 times more than normal cells. In a way, these cancer cells are literally crying out for help through light. But these experiments were conducted on mice, and in 2004, they also proved through advanced cancer cell imaging in humans that cancer cells indeed emit many more photons than normal cells because they spread rapidly and uncontrollably. This clearly meant that cancer could be detected at a very early stage, even before the very first tumor is formed. Today, we are only able to detect cancer after a tumor has formed through biopsy and MRI scans. But just imagine if we could identify abnormalities in the activity of cells even before a tumor is formed. So how many lives can be saved? Because in cancer recovery, time is of the utmost importance. In 2009, Kobayashi proved that the glow of our body matches exactly with our body clock, that is the circadian rhythm. During the day, when our metabolism is high, we literally glow more. And at night, during rest, we glow less. In 2019, they showed something truly beautiful, a miracle of nature. How the glow of the body changes during the evolution from a caterpillar to a butterfly. If you watched Pokemon in your childhood, you might remember how creatures glow before they evolve. Well, something kind of similar happens in real life too, during morphological transformation. It's just that the glow isn't visible to our eyes. And this year, they also proved that if you spend more time outside in the sun, the increased UV exposure on your skin will raise ROS levels, which will cause more biophotons to be released. So basically, UV-induced skin damage can be detected through biophotons. This is such a vast field, friends, that there are literally no limits to its medical applications. We can understand allergies, chronic inflammation, mutations and abnormalities in the body just by observing their glow. And as artificial intelligence gets integrated into this field and data libraries are created, doctors will be able to quickly identify problems just based on patterns.
Cancer research is increasingly powered by data. Now we have the tools to make a huge difference to human life.
This invention has huge potential. But before I finally explain where the scientists who developed the theory of consciousness went wrong, didn't you wonder exactly how photons are being created because of ROS? What is the exact mechanism behind this? Well, Kobayashi suggested this in his 2014 research review. Basically, if I explain this process in very short and simple language, let's first understand what ROS actually is. Our cells produce energy, and ROS is a waste product of this process. As the name suggests, reactive oxygen species. These are oxygen-based molecules that are basically extremely reactive. Why are they reactive? Mostly because of two reasons. Number one, either they have unstable electrons, meaning their outer shell lacks electrons, so they wander around trying to complete it. For example, superoxide or O2. Think of these oxygen molecules as being like a single unattached guy. Or number two, they are stable molecules, but the bonds between them are weak. For example, hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. In this, the bond between the oxygens is weak, and just like a wife stuck in an unhappy arranged marriage, it's ready to fall in love with someone else, to bond with someone else. Now, what happens if this illicit relationship actually forms? The whole household falls apart, right? Exactly the same thing happens in our body as well. Desperate ROS try to snatch electrons from the DNA, proteins, and lipids in our cells, weakening their structure. Think of it this way. What would happen if you constantly started removing bricks from the base of a building? That building would collapse, right? Exactly the same thing happens in our body as well. But all these reactions that are taking place, the transfer of electrons by Ross, basically as we studied in physics, these appear to us as photons in the electromagnetic field. This very momentum of electrons being pushed here and there is what we see as light particles, as photons. So this is basically the actual reason why our body glows. Now let me also clear this up, guys. And I myself only learned this just a few months ago. ROS is not all bad. In fact, in normal amounts, our body really needs it, because it plays a very important role in signaling, sending messages to the body for recovery and detoxification. It sends these signals to different cells. In fact, this ROS is extremely essential for detoxification. If you do bodybuilding, your body simply won't develop without ROS, because after a hardcore workout, it's the ROS molecules that communicate the message for protein synthesis extremely effectively, which triggers the body to start building muscle. In fact, in one study, supplementation with antioxidants like vitamin C and vitamin E right before or after a workout significantly blunted the stimulation of muscle building. And after a few months, the people who were taking these supplements had built less muscle. So ROS plays several important roles in our body within normal limits, but if they increase, they cause destruction. So in a way, as Gurbich first said, the light emitted from our body sends growth signals. This is kind of true. I mean, not literally that photons are sending messages through coherent patterns, but the real truth behind this light, the ROS, is definitely sending messages. You know, science is a beautiful journey of discovery, which is built on fundamentals and gradually grows on the basis of evidence. People look at a major discovery from so many different angles, some from a spiritual perspective, others as a sheer brilliance of nature itself. My aim in this video was also to explain to you how science develops over a period of time. Science is built on fundamentals, and while Fritz Albert Pope, Korotkov, and Masaru Emoto developed several theories based on some scientific discoveries and even demonstrated them through visual experiments, none of their experiments were peer-reviewed. That is, they were not verified by other scientists. They were not published in any reputed science journal. Even Pope's data on creating coherent patterns of his magical light was found to be inconsistent. Korotkov, with his GDV device, was not actually seeing any magical aura or energy fields, but rather moisture pressure and electrical conductivity. And Emoto, he was a businessman. He was happy to have his book reach the New York Times bestseller list. But these ideas have created a huge industry to this day, which operates entirely under the names of pseudoscience, parapsychology, mystic science, and even spiritual science. And even today, millions of people believe in these baseless things. The scientific voice gets suppressed, and sensational stories are always promoted. These mystical ideas have never been published in any scientific journal. They were only published in their books, and these ideas were exactly what people wanted to hear, not the actual boring truth. Under the echoes of their larger-than-life theories and charismatic storytelling, the quiet voice of truth remained suppressed. And then finally, when the truth presented itself to the world with all the evidence, those who understood, and those who didn't, well,